Does the combine still mean what it used to? I tell you, in the case of the Jaguars, you damn right it does. I'll tell you why in just a second on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up? Thank y'all for joining me here on Locked On Jaguars. I am the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast, and my name is Tony Wiggins. And here it is, your team every day, and we thank you for making us your first listen. I have to tell you also to head on over to the Locked On Jaguars YouTube page, and when you do that, make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and then hit that bell so that you receive notifications each and every time we drop an episode. And wherever you get your audio podcast, make sure you tap into that location as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. We'd also like to say hello to the everydayers that join us every single day. And you can be one. All you got to do is join us every single day. Let's get to it. Combine time. Is the combine a big deal? I'm going to answer that question real quick, especially when it comes to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that came up because I think Robert Saleh and maybe somebody else, another one of the coaches, they're not going. They're not going to the combine because everything they can do virtually. What positions get the most attention, and rightfully so? And then guys to watch that are Jaguar specific for this weekend's or this week's action. So by now, I'll let you know I decided at the last minute that my plans weren't going to go through to make it to the combine, but I will be covering the combine here from the Locked On Jaguars / Tony Wiggins studios, and I'll be tapping in with some guys that are up there with boots on the ground and hopefully have you some content all this week. You know, you can find most of the action when they start working out later on this week on the NFL Network, so make sure you check that out. It's going to be all over the place, man. Everybody's all on it. Is it a big deal? It's still fun for me. It's still fun for me to watch. I'm still a fan of it, a big time fan of it. But I get it that some coaches don't feel the need to go to the combine, that they'll do most of their work, their film study work, as well as the virtual meetings. The coach can meet virtually as long as there's some representatives from the team that are there. In terms of the Jaguars, no, the Jaguars, Trent Baalke, Doug Peterson, they're all going to be in attendance, and I'm sure a bunch of scouts and assistant coaches will be there as well. And I think it's really important because the Jags are it's not just a talent hunt for them, although that's a big part of it. For me, what it is with the Jaguars is they're still hunting for an identity, and they have to make sure that guys are a right fit. Now, we can argue all day until the day is long about whether or not they even know the fit that they're bringing in these guys to. Do they even know what their identity is? Have they set the template for who and what it is that they want? Apparently, that was one of the things, in my opinion, that suffered. The team doesn't have an identity, and I think sometimes the brass can say that, and they always point towards the players. Well, you have to actually let them know what they're getting into. You have to establish the identity. You have to establish the parameters. And there's some reasons why I think that was thrown off the rails a little bit. And that is because of the psyche that the team was going through when Doug Peterson got hired. And I recall asking him a question. Hey, man, do you just, go all out with it? Or are you aware that these guys have been a little bit damaged and may not believe? And Doug admitted that he proceeded with a little bit of caution, but at some point he had to turn up a little bit. I don't know if he did that at all his first year. I do know last year I'm hearing stories that Doug kind of turned up on him and told everybody, hey, man, y'all got to get you know what in gear. And that Doug was not the same coach in the second half of last season that he had been the first year and a half here in Jacksonville. Of course, at some point he was 17-12. Or 17-11. That, I think that's what his record was. Let me see. They went 9-7, and then won in the play. Yeah, they were okay. So they were 10-8, and then they started out 8-3. So you're looking at 18-11. He was 18-11 his first 29 games, and then all of a sudden things just went downhill. And now, he got stuck at like what is he 19, and I think they're 19-16 because they were 8-3, and then they ended up 9-7. So that's just not very good, man. And there's a lot left to be desired. And a lot of the things that came up is that they're not physical enough, they're not strong enough, they're not big enough, and that they don't have an identity. Trent Baalke, the GM, mentioned that they don't have an identity. I'm going to go ahead and say that that's probably on the leadership of the team, because you can't ask the players to establish something if you haven't established it yourself. So I think the combine is a big deal for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think they get a chance to reset on what type of players that they want to come in. And folks make so much of a big deal about physical traits, but I think it's also a mentality and a psychological thing too. I'm not saying that the guys that the Jaguars have at some point did not have the right mindset and the right mentality to come in here and play, because Trent Baalke has been the GM now for this will be his third cycle. This will be his third cycle as a solo general manager, 2001, 22, and 23. Yeah. So whatever those guys lack, it's either they changed once they got into the building or they lacked it when they first signed them. So we always, discuss talent. We always discuss the onus that's put on the players to make sure that they're fit, but we never ever discuss the house that they're asking the players to come in and fit into. And I think that that's a really, really big, important, big deal. If I'm an agent for a lot of these dudes, I'm like, they're going to interview you, but you know what? You're probably also interviewing them. That's the way I would look at it. I would interview them to understand exactly what it is that I'm going into. And I said this on a podcast last week. One of the things I believe, and I'm a firm believer in this, there have been more bad organizations that have ruined players than bad players that have ruined organizations. I am a firm believer in that. I think when an organization is poor, to say the least, over a number of years, in fact, in this case, over multiple decades, where they are more inclined, when you look back, you're more inclined to believe that they're just inept. I believe that has a lot of effect on how a lot of these dudes play and how they're all perceived as well. So while the Jaguars are interviewing these players, the Jaguars also need to be taking inventory of themselves and their messaging. Now, at some point later, on the day that I'm recording this podcast, you're going to hear from Doug Peterson and you're going to hear from Trent Baalke when they talk to all of the media. And then they're going to sit down with some local guys here. And we're just going to have to see exactly what it is that they have to say. Will it be more of the same, right? Will it be more of the same that we have to find this and we have to find that? It's not what you're bringing home from the hospital. It's the house and the comfort in the house that's going to determine whether that baby is raised. And I call them babies because they're babies to the NFL. So all of this is, while it's really, really important, and we can go back and forth about whether it makes a difference or not. I've talked about the fact that I don't think Trent Baalke is ever going to produce a winner. I think it's still important that they do what is sound for the football team for the future when it comes to draft picks, as opposed to doing what's best for the franchise. And I'm interested to see how they go about it. But the combine is here. There are different positions that are going to some positions, things won't change when you eval the players, but there are certain positions that when you watch them at the combine, it does allow some shifting to be had in the way guys are being ranked and the way they're being perceived. I'll go through that before I get to the third segment, where I tell you exactly who, from a Jaguar perspective, we have to watch out for based on what I believe are their tendencies. We'll do all of that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by BetterHelp. It's very, very important that as you try to figure out how you're going to move on a daily basis, when you're stretched thin, when you have a lot of things going on, a lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time, right? And we know time is the one thing that is not infinite for us. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. If you've benefited from it, then you know what I'm telling you is the absolute truth, because I have benefited from it. It helped me with my little 24-hour gauge and allowed me to actually prioritize some things, especially while I was trying to work through some physical shortcomings. All right. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get $10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Do that today to get 10% off your first month. And we thank you for joining us again here on Locked On Jaguars. We're at your team every day, and we always thank you for making us your first listen. I got another listen for you. That's Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the national top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. You guys are fire for joining me every single day here on Locked On Jaguars. I'm going to talk about now some positions where there is some movement. Look, most of these boards, while they're not totally set, scouts have been watching these kids for 2 years. Okay, so it's not like coaches don't, because all coaches do is coach. They coach and prepare and coach and prepare and coach and prepare. If there's a college coach like Jim Harbaugh, maybe he has a little bit of an advantage because he actually has been watching and evaluating these dudes at various levels since they were teenagers. However, NFL coaches don't even watch college ball during the season most of the time. And I've heard 5 or 6 of them say that. Maybe they'll catch a little bit of a big game, one of those big SEC games the night before an NFL game or something like that, if it's like number 1 versus number 3 or whatever. But for the most part, they don't. And the first foray they take into actually looking at these players is when the season ends and they finally get with the scouting department and they start going down things that they like, right? So it's going to be very important for me that certain position groups get the attention of the Jaguars, especially where we've had a coaching change. When you have a coaching change, you're going to have a little bit of a schematic adjustment, and that's what I'll call it, because I won't necessarily call it a scheme change, or I won't talk about alignment, whether it's a 3-4-4, 3-4-2-5, but more or less it's going to be more of a downhill, in-your-face scheme. And I don't think the Jaguars have enough players to play that Ryan Nielsen defense the way that he wants to play it. Now, I'm sure he can adjust that and play it the way he has to play it based on his talent. I told someone yesterday, I don't care about alignment. I just want the scheme to align with the talent that's on the team. And I don't think that that's something that has been done in the past. Therefore, if you're going to play in your face and downhill, what do you need? You need front and back, right? It sounds weird, but it's true. You need front and back. You need guys up front that'll force the quarterback to make a quick decision, and you need guys in the back end that can cover if you're playing press man or man off or press bail or whatever you're playing, that don't want to give up easy throws and don't want to give up big plays. Those two things work together. Therefore, in the NFL draft, what I'm watching for, or in the combine, what I'm watching for on the defensive side of the ball is I want to see corners that are competitive and twitchy. I'm looking for length, competitiveness, and twitchiness. Therefore, that 40-yard dash time does matter when it comes to a cornerback. How athletic and how fluid his movements are, and the fact that he can't be stiff, those things also matter. His body language, how he carries the drills, all of these things matter. They won't matter in a singular entity by themselves, though. What also matters with that is what you have already seen on tape. Does the athleticism, the competitiveness, and the interview process to find out, and everybody's going to say the right thing, but you have to be able to decipher who really means it and who doesn't mean it. And that's just usually you can do that just by pressing them a little bit. Shout out to Press Taylor since I mentioned his name, but that's not really what I'm talking about. But still, the thing is for me is these guys are going to be there, and the Jaguars are going to have a lot of them to choose from. Is there a big difference in the guys in the first day and the second day when the Jaguars will be making a second pick? What about the guys on the front end? Do they have the length? Do they have the scheme versatility? Are they guys that are compatible with the people that you anticipate that the Jaguars will bring back? What do they need? They just need ball players, man. They need dogs. They need guys that can play a little bit above the X's and O's, but still know how to have the discipline to do their job. So I think on defense, the positions to watch for will be defensive line. You're not looking for stiff guys. You're looking for long, athletic, big, powerful people with a motor that don't get tired when they're going through these drills. Conditioning is very, very important. It's a job interview. And I know Jalen Carter got tired and he still ended up being great. That's an outlier, though. Okay, everybody knew Jalen Carter was great. I still think you want to see what a guy is made of, because Doug Peterson this year talked about what are guys doing when they aren't here. You just basically need to find your football playing Jesse, who has a lot of talent, right? Especially in the first round. On the back end, length, competitiveness, ability to move the feet. Every corner is going to get beat, but can he recover? Does he have a memory that's going to go away? And then take all of the information you get this weekend and go back and look at the tape and see if what you saw on tape is substantiated, or if there's something that you need to go back and take a little bit of a look at, you go back and take a little bit of a look at that too. But then you talk to his coaches. One thing coaches don't do is lie for players, because they know that they're going to have to tell the truth next year and the year after that. You lie for a guy and then nobody's going to believe anything that you say in the future. So they don't do that to each other. Offensively, I think it's those pass catchers. If you saw the thumbnail, I got Adonai Mitchell on there. I've been talking about Keon Coleman. I've been getting barraged with people telling me about Mr. Mitchell out of Texas. I like him. I like his body. He's built a little bit like Justin Jefferson, a little bit of a different receiver. I'm just always wary of that dude that looks like he can get knocked off his line, right? If somebody plays press coverage. But I'm interested to see his athleticism compared to guys like Brian Thomas, compared to guys like Keon Coleman and Mr. Franklin out of Oregon. Some of those guys that I anticipate will be in the back end, the taller receivers, the guys that are 6'3", that'll be in the back end or the middle of the first round. What do they bring to the table? How do they compete? Do they look fluid? What do they look like when you think about them with Calvin Ridley, who I anticipate will be back along with Christian Kirk? Those are the guys that I think will really form some separation, especially when you look at the individual testing, and that'll go back and let you know how they were used in college, and it'll give you an idea of the guys that will fit in here with Jacksonville, and try to envision in your mind how they'll play in Jacksonville. So those are some guys that I think that you need to look at. I think Brendan Rice has a chance to really raise some eyebrows with his size and his skill set. A lot of teams actually need an influx of a more big and physical wide receiver. So that's something else that I'm looking forward to as well. Other guys to watch at positions that may or may not be priorities. We'll discuss that in just a second in segment number 3 on Locked On Jaguars. Yeah, and I have to let you know about FanDuel. That's right, man. FanDuel is the truth, and you can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. That NBA break is over. Load management is out of the window for the most part, because guys know in order to qualify for certain things, they got to play a certain amount of games. So Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players with teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, third and final segment here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. Segment one we talked about is the combine, a big deal. I think it's a big deal for a team that needs an identity and needs an influx of talent. Absolutely. You need to get guys that match. You need to get guys that are going to be self-motivated, but they also have to be talented and be able to play. And these first two picks have to be plug and play guys. What positions? We've talked about the changes on defense and how important it is to get the front and the back up to snuff so that you can run the system that you want, and what it'll look like to add a young, big, talented, tall, wide receiver. But there are some other positions. The Jaguars aren't going to ignore talent at these other positions. And I know that there's a lot that's out there in free agency. Guys are being released right now, and the Jaguars would really, I think they need to address I think they need to address the offensive line in both the draft and free agency. But I think they need to really hit that area in free agency to shore that up a little bit, make sure that they don't get caught being in love with their past draft picks and then find themselves in a situation where they were at last year. I think that that's a problem, where you realize, oops, we didn't do enough. And we all went, oops, we knew it, and you should have done it. So now it's, oops, you didn't make the playoffs, right? So I do think that there are some positions. One of them is defensive tackle. I think the Jaguars actually need somebody in the middle of that defense. They're probably going to release Foley Fadokazi. I'm going to hope Devon Hamilton comes back and plays similar to the form that he played with before he had a diagnosed illness. They still got Roy Robinson Harris under contract. Not necessarily my favorite player, but I mean, you're not going to cut him at this point. So you need to add to it. I think they need to get somebody that try to find someone, if you can, that won't leave the field. You can't take him off the field if you wanted him to. The question is does Byron Murphy or Johnny, his name is Jazan, but he wants to go by Johnny Newton, do they fit Trent Baalke and what he wants to do? I look at Atlanta and I look at Grady Jarrett, man, and I'm sitting there thinking, like, I'd take him in a heartbeat. But see, he's not a bulky guy because he's not long enough and he's not big enough. Maybe a guy like Tavondre Sweat is too big because he's not, I believe, a 3-down player. I think he's a 2-down player. And then you got to wonder, is that good enough for us to do? What about nickel corner? I think they need to find someone in this draft, and I hate to use the word find. They need to identify someone in this draft that can be a nickel corner for the next 8 years for this team. It seems like that's the most elusive position in that secondary. For a long time, I thought it was free safety, but finding that nickel, man, ever since DJ Hayden, I think, was the last guy that was adequate at that spot, they need to find a nickel. Now, I know people think Antonio Johnson is going to play that spot, and he could play that spot in a big nickel when they go to a 4-2-5. I anticipate Antonio Johnson is going to start, though, a strong safety this year. So they need someone else that can be a corner/safety or someone that is versatile to play those positions. And there are a number of candidates. Jarian Jones, I think he can play inside or outside from Florida State. His running mate at Florida State, Renardo Green, who was the glue of the Jaguars, who was the glue. What about Mike's? I'm sorry, he was the glue at Florida State. What about Mike Sangstriel? I know I'm not saying his name correctly, but he's a little bit short, but he is a specialist. This is another guy you got to wonder if he fits what Trent Baalke wants to do. They need outside dudes. They don't have an outside guy that's going to be under contract as of today after 2024. And with the way that they want to play, I don't necessarily think Tyson Campbell is going to play with his back to the quarterback a lot. I think he wants to see ball. So they may go hard in the cornerback department, especially if they don't hit it in free agency. And I don't know if there's going to be a lot of guys out there in free agency. I've talked about L'Jarius Sneed, it seems like he's the perfect guy, even though there's some people that thinks he can be a little grabby. He's the perfect guy for what Ryan Nielsen wants to do. But still, you can never have enough corners. But you don't have draft picks to draft everything you need. So you have to start looking in these later rounds. You have to look at some of the guys that I mentioned. If you're looking for a long athletic starter, how about Kyrie Jackson at Oregon? What is his time? How does he run? How does he look? Does he look fluid? Is he somebody that can play man to man? He's not a slot because I don't think he can. Some people think all slot guys are small too, and that's not the case. But I just don't think that that's where he's going to be best. I think he's going to be best outside on the boundary and running with these big receivers and getting those long arms into the action a little bit. But there are a lot of them, man. There's a lot of them. The Melton kid out of Rutgers, I think he can really, really play in the slot. I'm a big Josh Newton fan from TCU. I think he can play down there. There were a lot of guys at the Senior Bowl that really, really competed. And they're going to be available in the third and fourth, maybe even early in the fifth round, that you can bring them into camp and say, this is what I want you to do. That spot for me. So teams are always looking for guys that can stop people in the pass. When you ask me the guys to watch, the attention groups to watch that can make the biggest impression, I think there are players in every group that can change the way people feel about them. But as a whole, I think most of the big movement will come with the defensive backs, the wide receivers, and whether or not the defensive linemen are long, athletic enough, and can beat some people that can pop in and play. The Jaguars need more draft production this year than they got last year. I don't know if it was because they didn't give guys an opportunity, but they only had one person that really made an impact last year. Two people, actually. Johnson, once he got over an injury, Antonio Johnson, and, of course, Anton Harrison. They need more impact. They need more impact. They need to address, like I said, in free agency as well as the draft. This is a good interior offensive line draft. They need to make sure that they get one of those players that can come in here and be a dude that can compete for some playing time and give them something to look forward to in the future. You can always develop a good offensive lineman. You cannot take that for granted because it is Operation Protect number 16, and that's what we're thinking about now. Make sure you check out Locked On Sports today. Like I said, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on free Fire TV channels app. All right, man, check in all week. We got some more stuff. See if we can get some guests, if I can catch up with these guys in time to record. But make sure you stay tuned. If there's breaking news, I'll drop anything. If anything happens with the franchise tag, if anyone is released, if the Jaguars make any player announcements, look for me to reach out and say all of that stuff. And then I'll be commenting all day on social media about Trent Baalke and Doug Peterson and their comments from Indianapolis. Until then, you guys make sure you take care of each other like I always say. And thanks for joining me on Locked On Jaguars.